You may know that I was, still am, a serial entrepreneur. You may not know that I was one of the founding members of the North Texas Angel Investor Network and made investments in the startup companies. Startup companies heavily depend on investments from angel investors, but investing in a company in such an early stage is a high risk proposition. You can lose your entire investment. Trust plays a major role in making that investment decision. In this episode, I'm happy to introduce a friend of mine, one of the early members of the North Texas Angel Network, a serial entrepreneur himself and a serial angel investor, Jim Fontaine. Together, we will discuss how angel investors decide if they trust the entrepreneur enough to invest in their startup company in such an early and risky stage. Right after this.
Welcome to The Trust Show. I'm Yoram Solomon, your host, the author of the Book of Trust, and facilitator of the Trust Habits Workshop. My mission is simple. I want to help you form habits that build your trustworthiness, because the answer to this question will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you?
Jim, welcome to The Trust Show.
Thanks for having me.
So give our readers, listeners, I should say, some background about you. Your background as an entrepreneur, your background as an investor.
Well, I started out about a little over 40 years ago with electrical engineering degree, moved to Texas to work at Texas Instruments, but quickly got into the startup activity in the mid 80s. There was a bunch of us who were average age 26, started our first company, high-tech company. Since then, I've been involved in 6 startups, or the co-founder of 6 different startups, and then became an angel investor around 2012 or so, and was involved in about 10 other startups. So about a total of 16 startups over the last 40 years.
Okay, and what's your, I don't know if you want to share this or not, and it's okay if you say no. What's your track record in making those investments? You consider yourself successful?
Well, a definition of an angel investor or venture capitalist investor is out of 10 deals, 5 go away. 5, you lose your money pretty quickly. And then out of the remaining 5, 1 or 2 or 3, you might have I call them a single or a double. And then what you're looking for is a grand slam home run out of the 10 to pay for the other 9. So out of the 6 startups, and some are still undetermined yet, I had a single, double, strikeout and home run, and then we've got 2 that are, players on first base and players on second base. Put it that way.
Okay, so that's pretty good. Let's talk about making an investment in a startup. I remember building my own startups, and I know how risky it is. But why do you make an investment as an angel? What's the reward that you expect? What's the risk that you're willing to take?
Well, as an angel investor, let me distinguish between angel investors and venture capitalists, first of all. So an angel investor is typically someone like myself, someone like you. Typically, they were entrepreneurs before. They retired, typically an older age group, where they left their business or had an exit. And they want to still have some of the excitement, some of the juice, if you will, to be involved in startups, but this time more as a grandparent rather than a parent. And so part of the motivation is to make money, but a big part of it is to be involved, give back to the community, be involved in startups, help startups, share with CEOs and management team your experience, and then be successful. When you're a venture capitalist, I think you're much more worried about purely the return, because frankly, the returns on investment are very risky. And if angel investors are purely looking for a way to get a return of 20% or 30%, there are much safer ways to do it that involve an angel investing. So part of my motivation was to be involved and help young entrepreneurs. And I haven't done any angel investing for a while. Part of it, I concluded that I'm probably not a very good investor because I violate some of the basic rules of investing, and that is I very easily fall in love with the technology. I mean, technology can be very seductive. I very easily fall in love with technology, and I very easily fall in love with the founders and the CEO of the company. And you can't do that if you really want to be a successful investor. So again, I was on a board of quite a few of these companies and try to help them through, but it is very, very highly risky. Again, there's a lot safer ways, and probably, at least for the last 10 years, real estate would be a much better way to make returns on your money much safer.
I would say right now, to invest in bonds or CDs, they're over 5%. I mean, it's not 20, 50%, but it's pretty safe. Well, we'll see. We're recording this episode as the government is trying to push the debt limit. And if they don't, then they might start defaulting on those bonds.
Right.
But I'm not
Right.
giving any investment advice here. So, you know, you're risking money. Do you not care? Are you not
Oh,
afraid?
no, you definitely care. I was the North Texas Angel Network. We had a rotating set of chairmen, and I was chairman of the group, co-chairman of the group for a year or so. And we tried to put together instructions or guidelines for the new angels coming in. And we would tell them, you can't come in and try to cherry pick one or two deals, because statistically, you got to have at least 10 deals. You'd like to have 20 over a period of time, so that statistically you can come out with some level of return. And um, I forget what was the question now.
If you don't care, if you're not afraid of the
Oh,
of losing
and
your
so
investment.
you never want to lose your money. And I'd say over those 10 investments or 11 investments I did, I'm a little bit above break even, but certainly not to my satisfaction. And which is partly the reason why I quit investing, because with as much work I was putting in, you'd like to have a higher return. But again, typically an angel investor is not doing it as a living. He's not doing it with a big portion of his or her financial base. We would tell investors, don't ever go over 5% and so on. So we try to get people to understand that there's a very, very high risk. A venture capitalist is different. They're investing somebody else's money. They have to have returns. They target for 30% returns. And you can see what happens with some funds do fantastic and other funds do very, very poorly. So even the highly paid professionals have a difficult time making a good return in the venture industry.
So, let's jump. This is, after all, the trust show. Let's talk about trust. So you're about to invest. What gets you to the point where you say, I mean, obviously the reward is going to be financial, but as you said, it's not only financial. And I'd agree. When I look at the investments that I made, it wasn't, I wouldn't invest in just any company. I would only invest in a company that I knew their business. So I kind of minimized the risk. You probably did the same thing. You knew the market or the industry enough to mitigate the risk compared to other people who don't know anything about the market. You liked the entrepreneurs, but at some point there is a risk. And to compensate for that risk, you have to trust that they know what they're doing, or you have to trust other things. So how do you go about that? How do you decide, oh yeah, I trust them with my money?
Yeah, I think trust is earned, and in the case of this, especially when you're meeting brand new entrepreneurs that you don't know, that maybe nobody else knows, that is a big leap. Often, most angel investors would put money into deals that another angel brought the deal in. Another angel knew the founders. Another angel, had a history with them, and so therefore you can kind of transfer their trust over to from that other angel investor to yourself.
Oh,
But
you're
also,
touching on the trust law number 5. Trust is transferable.
exactly,
But what
yeah.
if nobody knows them?
Well, we had a pretty structured due diligence process. We would break it
Okay.
up into 5 main categories and divide it up. So I'd say, tell what, Yoram, why don't you take the financial part? I'll take the technology part. Someone else take all the legal issues. Someone else do on the team members. And so we did a pretty thorough due diligence on their past, their references, and try to get to know them, try to spend time with them. They would be, grilled pretty heavily by a team of investors that are thinking about it. And the idea, the plan was that if any red flag pops up, let's walk. In other words, again, I mentioned that I I wasn't so great at it because I often looked for reasons to invest, but you're supposed to look for reasons to not invest. You're supposed to look for reasons to kick it out and not do it. But over time, and it's usually the CEO, if the CEO gives you straight answers, you can get, when you double check the background, you find that it was a straight shooter. You find that they're not trying to hide things. You find they admit things when they had mistakes and so on. We had a couple of groups that came in and we went into due diligence process. And then we just started finding out some things that they seemed to be exaggerating more about their past, or they seemed to, things didn't quite line up in terms of what they were doing. And I'd rather have an entrepreneur say, I did this startup and we failed miserably. I was just, an idiot about it. I should have done this, should have done that. I learned a lot of lessons, versus an entrepreneur that comes in and says everything they've ever done was just perfect. So part of it is developing trust for them, that you think that they're telling you the honest truth. And that is, especially if you're going to be on their board, you realize there's going to be lots and lots of problems. And, if you understand a problem and you're honest about the problem and you try to break it down and go try to solve it, that's a good way to do it. But if you have entrepreneurs that aren't telling you the full truth, or only want to give you the good news or different things like that, that's not a way to solve problems. And it's also not a company you want to invest in or be part of.
You brought out several things, and as you can imagine, having worked on the trust issue, have it even as a logo on my shirt. Everything you say, I'm starting to break it down into this model. You said something interesting. You said that trust is being earned, which means that, and you talked about spending time with them and drilling into them quite a lot. I mean, what would you say? How many hours? And I know I'm asking this out of the blue, but how many hours would you say you have spent with the entrepreneur or with the team of entrepreneurs that you didn't know, that nobody recommended before, until you got to the point where you said, you know what, I can read them well enough, I can trust them. They earned my trust. And I'm not talking about the fact that what they're saying are the right things, but just how much time would you say that you'd spent with them before you make the investment decision?
In terms of total time, it might be, as far as length goes, at minimum a month, sometimes 2 months, on and off. And again, it depends on what part of it you do diligence. If you do diligence the part with the team members, you would spend more time. I particularly always was a little bit suspect. I'll tell you about my first angel deal, a non-structured angel deal. I had started a company. I got bought by a company in Silicon Valley, and I moved to Silicon Valley for a few years from Dallas, and then left that company. And while I was out there, I literally met a guy in a garage working on a piece of technology. It was called a DAA. Basically, back in the days, this was late.
Oh, you're
90s.
kidding me! Digital to analog. You're talking about modems.
Yeah, it's a. You said digital analog, which threw me off. It's DA access. It's basically the telephone companies required you to isolate the lines from the phones or whatever else you're using. Back then, you got your phones from them, but every modem had to have this little isolation thing, and it used transformers and so on. So this guy had come up with a way to do it optically coupled way, and also he said it could actually analyze the phone lines and give you better performance and everything else. And I thought I had discovered this diamond in the rough, and I was going to, bring everything I'd done in terms of starting companies. And so I started out as just to be an angel investor and try to pull in some other angel investors. And quickly, the first angel investor said, "I'll put in 400,000. This is back in '98. I'll put in 400,000, but you got to be the CEO." And I said, "Well, I'm trying to be an investor, not a." "Well, you got to be the CEO at least for a while." So we did it. I pulled together a quick team. We had a small team of 4 or 5. We got into a customer at the time. 3Com was a big modem provider. They quickly evaluated the product. Texas Instruments was a big supplier of chips that went into modems. And so we went from 0 to 100 miles an hour in a matter of 4 or 5 months. TI was going to buy the company for $50 million. And then we found we couldn't quite get our test data to match the test data of Texas Instruments or of 3Com. And we struggled and we struggled and we struggled, and we started getting suspicious of the entrepreneur, the founder. and he was very protective of this lab. So one weekend when he went back to Silicon Valley, we all came into the company and some other engineers. We set up and ran all the tests, and sure enough, our test matched TI's and 3Com's. It did not match the founder. And I remember I was just shaken to the core. I couldn't believe that this guy would lie to me, would make up data. And when he showed up the next Monday, I sat him down and I said, so there's one of two possibilities. Either you're an absolutely horrible engineer or you're a bold-faced liar. Which one is it? And he looked at me and said, I'm a horrible engineer. And I said, well, either way, you're going to have to leave the company. So we tried to salvage what was left of it, and there really wasn't much. But he had falsified the data. He had lied about what he had. I've got to believe that he somehow thought he could get over the finish line at some point. But when you present actually data, that's kind of Theranos kind of activity. And TI said goodbye. Com21 or 3Com said goodbye. And even though I hadn't lied, or the other people hadn't lied, we got associated with that individual in terms of that startup. And so ever since then, I've been very leery of what people have to say and really try to dig into it. But in the end, you don't know. You're just going to have to go down the path with them and hope for the best.
Well, but you still have done some due diligence and before that, so it's not like you haven't done anything. I think, again, if I'm looking at not the trust model, but the 8 laws of trust, the eighth law is that the level of trust that you had in that entrepreneur, or in any entrepreneur for that matter, let's even generalize it further. The level of trust that any investor would have in any entrepreneur is the product of the investor's trustfulness, their willingness to trust entrepreneurs in general, or specifically in that stage, and the specific entrepreneur's trustworthiness. And I think it sounds like, we call it the once bitten, twice shy, but really what it does is it hurts your trustfulness. The next entrepreneur you looked at, you already discounted that formula for yourself.
Yeah, that's true. And I think I wasn't successful. What I liked about that entrepreneur is I liked him a lot personally. He was a very personable guy. He wasn't, he wasn't a snake oil salesman or a pitch person. He was just seemed like a down to earth, honest person. And, you just got to be careful. You're not just making buddies. You're getting other people to put their money into a company. Eventually, that company, we shut it down, and whatever money was left, we gave back to the investors.
So yeah. By the way, the reason I knew what DAA was, I had sold in 2000. I sold the company to PCTEL, and I'm sure the name PCTEL came around in that business.
Well, interesting enough, there was a company started in Austin that I knew the founders very well because they were at Cirrus Logic, where I was at. Cirrus Logic had bought Crystal Semiconductor, and they also had bought my company, Pixel Semiconductor, and the spinoff from that started Silicon Labs, and they were making a solid state DAA, which did eventually work, and they did quite well with that.
Yeah, that was the DAA that we used, and this it only shows how small the world is. When I was working at Texas Instruments, one day I received an offer to go and work in Silicon Labs. But that's I'm glad I went wireless in my career. But again, to go back, if you look at the entrepreneur, you kind of gave two options, and one of them was the competence. You said either you're a terrible engineer, and the other was personality compatibility. And personality compatibility has the absolute components like you're lying to me, and you touched on one of those. But it also has other components which I'll touch in a minute. But so at the end, was he, in your opinion, I know what he told you, but in your opinion, was he not competent, or was he lying?
In some ways, that's kind of why I made the statement to him. And in some ways, it didn't really matter. And I wasn't going to say there's no gray area here. We went out on a limb. And interesting enough, a few years later, with a different company that I was involved with, Microtune, we were selling silicon tuners, and we were selling them into Cisco was one of the customers that were building cable modems. And so I walk into a meeting, and there's this guy sitting at the table in Cisco meeting, and I thought, well, I'm trying to get them to buy our product. He acted like we were old buddies, like nothing happened, and people around him said, "Oh, this guy, I won't use his name. This guy's really a good guy," and everything else. And I wanted to say, well, you better be careful. But in any case, he was continued to be incompetent, but a good liar or a good fooler, because he had a pretty strong position at Cisco a few years later.
So, you brought an interesting point. You said it doesn't matter. I remember, I don't know if you ever watched, Simon Sinek had this video, and where he talked about being performance versus trust, and he put them one against the other. Which one do you, if you got high performance, high trust, there's no doubt that you're dealing with the right person. Low performance, low trust, there's no doubt you're dealing with the wrong person. But how do you make the compromise between performance and or competence and let's call it trust? I really would look at it as personality compatibility. And one of the things that I didn't like about that was that he was balancing them, saying, this one is more important than that one. What you just said kind of confirmed the way I look at them. I multiply them. You get 0 on one of them. It doesn't matter which one. You still, the answer is 0. If the person is incompetent, you're not going to trust them. If they're highly competent but a liar, you're not going to trust them. Either way, it doesn't matter.
Exactly. Yeah. I think you've I don't know if it was one of your eight rules, or you said different people start out differently. I start out typically in any kind of relationship, business, friendship, romantic, is I have a high level of trust, and over the years I've come to tell people, you're getting full trust. So don't, the minute you break any of that, it's going to drop way down. Whether it goes to 0 or not. But I'm giving you full trust. So when I said you got to earn trust, that's more of a learned behavior that I have in business dealings. But personality-wise, I just tend to trust people.
So, you bring an interesting point. Who was it? Ernest Hemingway said the way to know if you can trust someone is to trust them, or something to that extent. I'm a little hesitant in saying, if I absolutely know nothing about how trustworthy you are, I'm not going to go full bore and say I'm going to give you 100% trust. I'm going to want to at least get a sense of what is the ballpark of your trustworthiness, and then I'm with you in that I'm going to extend more trust, but not completely. Are you doing it differently? Are you looking at it differently?
Well, I think it's I extend 100% trust, like you say, to the level that I'm willing to accept the negative consequences. So if you meet a romantic person, I'm going to trust you right away, but I'm not going to give you my bank account. And you slowly develop more and more trust. So I think my point is that I do know people that come into relationships and don't have any trust, and they, are always suspicious. So I tend to, I think, give a person the highest level of trust that the negative consequences aren't going to, kill me or put me out of business or, harm me in some way. And like I said, so in terms of angel investing, you have to, they have to earn that. But again, what I have found over the years, I remember when I was young, I was in my, I think the first company we were starting we were trying to build world's first electronic color darkroom, basically what Adobe Photoshop does today, but back in the days when computers couldn't do any of those things. And my partner and I, we were both 27 probably at the time. We went to New York to a venture capitalist. We thought it was so great that we at least got a meeting. And he said, my criteria is 3 points in a technology investment. He said, first of all, the team is an experienced team. Have they done it before? Have they gotten their war wounds? Number 2 is the market. He said, I don't want to bet on creating a market. It needs to be a big and growing market. And the third thing is disruptive technology. And he said, I'm willing to bet on disruptive technology because if you can do that, if you can be disruptive and create something great, you can have a great successful company because you've got a team that can execute and you got a market ready for it. And so in that case, he had divided it down by 3 areas and said, I don't want to bet on these two, but I'm willing to bet on this one. And he said, you guys are no experience, too young. You're trying to develop a market and you're developing technologies. He said, I never bet on the trifecta. So obviously he didn't put any money into us. But it kind of goes back to, I think as you get older, you want to rely more upon transferred trust from people you know. So going forward, after a certain point, I wouldn't invest in any deals unless I knew somebody at least had some connection with them with some background.
Yeah. And, it actually puts a pretty significant burden on, let's say, on you if you're recommending an investment to somebody else. I mean, you have recommended investment. You brought investors to companies you've invested in, and it kind of puts some burden on you to make sure that you don't violate the trust that they have in you when you recommend a new company. So is it different for you when you recommend to somebody else to invest versus when you make your own investment decision?
Um, it's obviously different because one is I'm trusting their input and they got to trust mine. I believed what I did. I tried to do is when I brought in deals and I knew the entrepreneur, I would make it very clear as what I knew about the entrepreneur, what my experience was with him or her, and also what I didn't know about the entrepreneur or what my concerns might be with that entrepreneur. So I did really want to share, because everybody's got their pros and cons and good and bad. Like here's the full lay of the land, and he knows a lot about sales, and this is a very sales oriented product. So I think it'd be good. But if you want to bet on him to know technology, this person's the wrong person. So you try to be very honest. You don't come in with a lot of hype about he's the greatest person or she's the greatest woman that I've ever met and all these kind of things. So you try to give the team, and the more you do that, the more the other angel investors, I think, gain respect for you and say, okay, you're giving us a straight shoot.
I remember, even though it's not necessarily related to entrepreneurs and startups and investments, but a friend of mine was years ago was interviewing for this company, and the CEO, he gave references. He was still working at TI at the time with me, and he gave references. So yeah, we have this in common. We both worked at TI, but he gave I think 3 or 4 references. But the CEO of the company that was going to hire him or making him an offer, he knew me personally. We were in the same field of Wi-Fi at the time. That was even before it was called Wi-Fi. And he just made that one call. He only called me, and that was enough for him. So this is kind of the quality versus quantity of transferable trust. But the thing is, when he asked me, what do you think? I knew that if all I'm going to say was just going to be a glowing review, a glowing reference, he's not going to believe me. That's it shows confirmation bias. It shows that I already am biased in his favor, and you can't trust someone like that. And just like you described it, I told him, that here are a few things that you may want to think about, and these are the areas where I think he's strong, but these are the areas where I think he's weak, and you make your own decision. But just by saying that, I think the element of BS or no BS goes up, because they know that you're not just going to give the good, you're going to give the bad as well.
Yeah. The other thing I would find when I would do background on entrepreneurs was I'd call their references but quickly ask who else did they work with, and then try to call people that they weren't on their list, and
Yeah.
and you'd be surprised about that. The other thing is I found when talking to references, don't just ask the typical questions. Start asking about, did you ever travel with this person? What were they like traveling? I mean, start to dig in a bit more and kind of conversationally, and people will reveal a lot more. When I talk to the entrepreneurs themselves, they're all prepared for the interview. So they're quickly going to go into, my first job was this, my second. So I'd say, no. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to junior high? Tell me about your junior high years. And first of all, they're not expecting that. And people reveal a lot about their character and everything else by talking about grade school, junior high, high school, college if they went there, and part of it is trying to get a flavor for that person in terms of their integrity as well as their confidence.
Yeah, it's amazing the things, and again it goes back into the personality compatibility, because sometimes somebody is going to say something to you where you're going to go, if you did this, if you played a role in this, there's a lot that I know about you. To me, by the way, the serving in military, 35th Airborne, I know whenever I was looking for somebody, an investor or anything for that matter, and they knew that, it already bought me certain points. It already created some kind of an image in their minds of who I was. Um, you know, you said something. I'm trying to remember how you said. Well, I'll get back to it. You also talked about, when earning trust, having spent time with them. What part did their body language play in your decision? Were you trying to read the body language to try and see, was it important to you that the meetings are in person versus let's just exchange emails?
No, it's very important for me anyway to be in person. I think there's a tremendous amount you learn over the body language, and that's why it's helpful to go, to Starbucks or someplace and get a coffee and see, how do they sit, how do they treat. If you go to a restaurant, how do they treat a waiter? How do they just how they basically behave? I mean, there's certain things you can check the facts. They worked at this place, they had pretty good reviews, but trying to learn about them in more detail, you will pick up a variety of things. I had there's a hedge fund that invested when I was running Microtune as a public company, and that the person would interview us, and you had to be very careful when you talk to as a public company. But he always talked about people's verbal body language, is what he called it. He said he's really looking for people's verbal body language when he asks them a surprising question, and if they act a certain way, he can kind of pick out what's really kind of going on behind the scenes. So yeah, body language is very important, and their manners, everything else about them is important. It's because you're betting on that team to succeed, and and they're going to hit a lot of stumbling blocks. And if they can organize and pivot and do things, you're trying to judge their character as well.
That component, the body language, is the part of the intimacy component, where right here with the eye, that's the intimacy component. And in 1971, Albert Mehrabian wrote a book called Silent Messages. And we can argue over the research that he's done and his conclusions, and but he said something. He wrote something. He said, when people's not, and I'm misquoting it, but the gist is the same. When people's body language or nonverbal communications disagree or are inconsistent with the words they use, people will distrust them. Yeah. So we distrust them. So when you're asking a question they're not expecting, it's a lot harder for them to control their body language. And that means you get the very front and center view of whether their body language and their words are consistent.
Yeah.
It's in one of my studies, what I found was that the highest correlation to trust or trustworthiness is shared values. And when you talked about how do they treat a server in a restaurant, or how do they fly, that's essentially it. I mean,
Yeah.
you want to feel that you share values, and that they don't have completely opposite values from you. I even remember once when I ran for office, and there was this organization that was considering endorsing me. Now, without getting into politics, it was an organization, a partisan organization of the other party that I would say belonged to. Not only that, it was a women organization. And I guess by now we've established I'm not a woman, I'm a man. And so I thought the probability that they're going to endorse me is close to zero. Oh, I should add one more thing to that. My opponent was a member of that organization.
Okay.
So it's a women's organization. I'm a man. It's an organization, a partisan organization of the other party from me, and they knew what party I was with. And my opponent is a member there. And something happened at work that made me not be able to go to their candidate for him. I offered, I'll come on a different time, a different date. Didn't never worked out. But somebody called me the next day and said that I don't know if I would call her executive director, but the organizer of that organization, she stood up and said, I would like this organization to endorse Yoram Solomon. And people were shocked. I mean, he's the wrong gender and the wrong party, and his opponent is a member here. And by the way, she's sitting right there, and you're going to endorse him. And what she said was, she found, I didn't even have that on my LinkedIn profile. She found that for 2 years, I was a coach in Destination Imagination. I don't know how many people even know this program. I didn't think it was important enough to put it on my profile or my resume. Somehow she found that, and she said, somebody who does that is somebody we should endorse. So it's amazing how big of a part does shared values play. I found an 86% correlation.
Yep, I agree. Um,
So, yeah,
I'll ask, like I said, trying to go back into people's, because the formative years in terms of really a lot of your character was really developed long before your business career. And so asking, and part of it is, again, trying to catch them a little bit off guard, but, oh, so who was your favorite junior high teacher? And they hadn't thought about that. Okay. Why, what did you like about that person? And you can learn, again, it's surprising if you listen, what you learn from people.
yeah. No, that's right. And that's where you pay attention to body language, to tone of voice, to consistency, and things like that. Well, we're about out of time, but I want you to tell one more thing, and another
Okay.
story, another background for something. Uh, when you know what, before that, there's one more question. So you made an investment in a company. Think of a company that you made an investment in. How closely do you stay in touch with them after the investment?
Well, a lot of the investments I made, angel investing, I was on the board. I'd say over half of them I was on the board. Um, the one that's closest was the most recent one. I was both a founder and an investor. And, I had, back in the early 80s, I had read a book by Tracy Kidder. It was called Soul, the New Machine. And it was about the invention of the latest mini computer by Data General, which was, most of your viewers might not know who that is, but they're a computer company. And he had spent time with the engineering team, and he wrote this. It ended up winning the Pulitzer Prize book about the soul of the new machine, about the development of this. And he really made it exciting and captured what a lot of people think is very boring stuff of engineers trying to solve these problems. And I love that book, and it gave me a bit of the entrepreneurial bug myself. And I always thought, and I also had a interest in film and interest in filmmaking. And through all those startups, I thought this would have been great to do a documentary film on it. So the most recent company I invested in, as well as started up, I started making a documentary film from pretty much day one. And I got a couple of filmmakers in, and we thought it'd be like a 9-month process, maybe a 20-minute film. Well, 4 years later, hundreds of hours of footage. And I have been editing that for 3 years, and we cut it into a series, a documentary series on a startup. The filmmakers, I had given them some money. We ran out of money after the first 6 months. So I actually started to learn how to film myself and really did everything else from that point forward. So I kept in close touch, but also as a documentarian, I guess is what you'd call it. We have, for the first time ever, a observational documentary of a startup company. And they've had a lot of difficulties, and it's not clear they're going to be successful. In fact, you might think that they're not going to be successful based upon the struggles they've had. And I remember someone saying, "Did you know this company was going to have difficulties or not quite make it?" And I said, "No, I put a lot of money into this in time. I thought it was going to be a very easy win." But we actually document this, and we show, because 70% of startups fail. This may or may not be a failure, but it certainly shows to any entrepreneur who's thinking about this, is that you hear about Elon Musk and Gates and all these wildly successful startups. 70% of them fail, and also 50% don't ever get off the ground. So actually, the ratio is worse than that. So 70% of ones that actually get funding and startup fail. So we wanted to capture that. And so the answer is I've kept very much in touch with that company for 4 years after, and filming what's going on with that company.
So you got ahead of me. I was going to ask because
Uh,
we met each other at N10, the North Texas Angel Network, while I was there. Then once I got elected, I didn't have time to attend the meeting, so I stopped. And then I think it was about 2 years ago that you reached out to me with a very interesting project, and that's the project you're talking about.
right.
Can you share the name of this documentary?
We've been playing around with different names. Initially, it was called The Last Startup because for many of the entrepreneurs, it was going to be their last startup. But I think right now the name that I'm leaning towards is a startup odyssey, or Odyssey of a Startup, because it really is a journey, and we're trying to capture that journey. So it's 9 episodes, 9 45-minute episodes. I'm working with a couple of faculty members at several universities. We're probably going to start out with it in some of the graduate level entrepreneurial business classes. Um, in fact, we're going to try to propose to this group, a consortium, about this being some kind of curriculum. Along with that, we'd have to develop some classwork that go along with it. But also, I'm looking to get a little bit more mainstream, because it's the feedback so far is it's very interesting, but pretty narrow audience that wants to watch this. And so I don't know if it's a candidate for Curiosity Stream or something like that. Probably not Netflix. But anyways, we've still got part of that journey to go to figure out how we're going to deploy it. But probably a multiple prong approach. First one would be probably working with some of the schools as a curriculum.
I was thinking about that as you're saying it. You know that I teach entrepreneurship at SMU, and I was thinking once this show is out, wherever it's going to be available, I'm thinking about making it mandatory for my students to watch it.
Yeah, and so we thought about maybe we take the episodes and do a small excerpts out of them, along with class, notes and materials, how to write a business plan, and so on and so forth. And then tell the student, well, the rest of it, you got to watch on your own, the rest of the
Yeah.
episode. But there are, and we have you're one of the experts. We have 7 different experts that comment along the way. And so part of it is you can see interaction. You can see what happens when people have constructive and destructive conflict. But we wanted to bring the audience just to have some expert kind of pop in and say, this is okay. Don't get worried that they're arguing. This is as Yoram said, startups are built upon constructive conflict, constructive conflict.
Constructive disagreement, yeah.
Destructive, because that's how you get through ideas and go forward on it. So yeah, I think it's going to be a situation. Anybody who's thinking about or wants to be an entrepreneur, or even any kind of business, I found quite a few tradespeople that are really interested in it, even though they're not in the high tech business, to kind of see what goes on behind the scenes. It's the first time you really get a seat at the table to see what happens in a startup, as opposed to a visit or a sort of facade as to what's happening in a startup.
And does this show end? Well, I think the company is still in business. So the show, we don't know if the show is going to end with somebody is going to go to jail for 20 years,
No,
like another video.
Yeah, I don't think this will be Theranos 2 or anything like that. But we don't know exactly how it's ended, because the company is still in business. I'm hoping it'll obviously end well, because a lot of times companies fail multiple times and they finally get it right. But I think basically the issue, eventually they're going to run out of money, and we'll see what happens then. So I'm hoping there'll be an epilogue at the end that I can say what happens. But right now, it's don't know what's going to happen.
Or you can go to them and say, "Hey, I'm about to wrap up this show. You need to decide. Either you go out of business or you're successful. But it has to happen in the next 3 months while I'm still shooting it."
Yeah, I think I think they'll help me out with that one.
So you already disclosed, and I wanted to, in full disclosure, I am involved in this project. I'm one of the experts that you draw on, and I can say that there is a lot that you can learn about trust and about entrepreneurship from that show.
from everything I've seen. Jim, if anybody is interested in getting in touch with you, learning maybe more about the project or anything else, how do they get a hold of you?
I guess the best way is we started a little production company with the two other filmmakers and myself. It's called Over 60 Films. And I think between the group, there's been made over 60 films, but really we called it that because everybody was over 60 at the time. But so over60films.com, and there's also jim.fontaine at over60films.com.
Okay, and you can see the link right below us in this video. Jim, it's been great to have you on my show this time, not on your show. So thank you for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, like it, subscribe to this channel, and get informed when I release more episodes like that. And remember, the answer to this question will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can you be trusted?